Well, on behalf of MyTech, I want to welcome everybody to the Indie Tarot Card Collection Talk today with the MIT Libraries. Emilie Hardman is here today, head of the Distinctive Collections, who will talk about the amazing collection of tarot cards currently at the MIT Library. And it's a unique collection for sure, not offered by anyone else. So there's going to be some amazing things to learn today, and talking about the digital possibilities of tarot cards and some other interesting features. So Emilie, if you could share the Indie Tarot Card Collection with us.
Great. Thanks so much, Diane, and everyone at MyTech for inviting this talk. And thanks so much to everyone showing up. I am experiencing a new element of Zoom life where I absolutely see no people. So I'm really staring into the void here. You should be able to interact with the talk through the Q&A function or through the chat function. And members of the MyTech team are monitoring that and have full permission to interrupt me at any time for questions as we go, and I'll certainly leave some time at the end. So as Diane said, sorry, let's begin with one small technical error. I seem not to be able to advance. Here we go. Okay, great. So if you were visiting us in person at the Department of Distinctive Collections, or DDC as we call it, we would definitely present you with swag. So here's a pale imitation of what we would offer to you, or measuring tape and pencils. DDC is a newly conceived department within the libraries, and our mission is to use collections to cultivate an interest in the past, the present, the future, the humanistic and the scientific, the physical and the digital, in order to inspire and enable research, learning, teaching, experimentation, and play for a diverse community of users. So we might show you any part of our broad collections, our pre-1800s books, ephemera and artifacts which explore the history of science, MIT history, professors' papers and manuscript collections, contemporary artist books, a premier collection on global Islamic art and architecture, digital materials, our digital media transfer kits. And we would also invite you, were you with us, to create with us and to build understanding and knowledge through handling and through doing. It's that mind, hand, and heart thing of MIT. It's really what we're trying to practice. So you might make physical books with us. You might build a digital collection and simulations using our collections. But what you're really here for, right, is the collection of indie tarot cards. So this collection focuses on contemporary artist-made and independently produced tarot decks. We have a particular interest in radical, feminist, queer, POC, and spiritually and religiously diverse revisions to traditional tarot archetypes and narratives. Soon after I arrived at MIT, I proposed building this collection for a number of reasons that we'll explore. And while those reasons are transferable and could provide a rationale for creating or acquiring this collection really anywhere, taken all together, those reasons make it be a really uniquely, distinctly important collection to be at home at MIT. A central image of the indie tarot origin story for me is this one. I had just proposed the project actually to collect these decks, and I took a trip to Washington, DC. I found myself in a hotel room, and this was the mini bar. And I don't know if you have zeroed in on it yet, but the thing that I first saw, before the gluten-free snacks and the organic gum, was a travel-sized tarot deck. And I just had this powerful sense of confirmation, of affirmation, that tarot was having a real cultural moment and that we were going to get to be part of documenting that. This tarot moment, though, is and it is not in many ways about this particular deck that you're seeing here in the mini bar. I'll circle back to that. We have a lot to talk about with that deck, but it's not the full story. The mini bar deck really points to this broader public interest, a surfacing call for engagement with tarot. Conventional definitions of tarot likely call it, depending on the perspective, something like a tool for divination or for self-reflection, or a game in the form of a pack of playing cards. And it is, of course, those things and more. What you see here is a Kickstarter screenshot taken just today with some 900 projects. And this is just one platform on which people are imagining and reimagining new tarot decks. They're changing archetypes, they're playing with aesthetics, they're pushing at boundaries and asking for discomfort, or they're trying to create comfort, build new tools and opportunities for engagement and understanding. So we've been buying these Kickstarter decks from Indiegogo, from Etsy, from artists directly, decks especially from creators who are really trying to provide a new visual language and using elements of their identities or their communities to hold up a mirror to their interior experiences, their unique social experience, and to the narrative arc of a diverse array of lives. Tarot's moment is about visibility for the form and about proliferation of the materials working within that frame and providing these sometimes radically new access to the tool of tarot. This is one of my just favorite shots. It's a moment when we were first acquiring the decks, and there were so many on offer. The moment that we were collecting in is really a peak of the resurgence of interest in tarot broadly, so much so that we needed to have this tarot overflow area. But the current resurgence of interest in tarot, it set the stage for the collection we were building at MIT. The effort wasn't simply concerned with documenting all of the cultural production of this moment. Working within the context as I do of a digital first library system, as someone who really powerfully believes in who believes really in the power of that physical engagement with collections, I very specifically wanted to build or acquire a collection that could equally invite highly unique opportunities for users to engage the same material in both a tangible and a digital mode. Similarly, our institutional context as a social justice framed library provided the perfect platform through which to address issues of diversity and representation, as well as issues of access and accountability in the development of the collection. So it's about the content, it's about the actual stuff, it's also about how we buy it, how we describe it, and how we invite people to use it. And these efforts aren't at all abstractions. They're not box checking or virtue signaling. They're at their very core an attempt to demonstrate very directly how and why it matters that we collect and make collections accessible with equity, diversity, inclusion, and social justice values in mind. So over the course of the last year, we have developed this collection of approximately 500 independently produced tarot decks. And we've been experimenting with them in classroom contexts, community teaching and learning events, and also developing and supporting digital prototyping, all with the aim of exploring our ethical commitments to documenting cultural production and to practicing creative stewardship. I'm not assuming any tarot knowledge here for this talk. So before I get too deep into our own unique collection, I will do some general tarot history, very, very general, and exploration of the form. Tarot has a really nicely squirrely history. It's rife with falsehoods and complete exotifications of its origins. The history, semiotics, and sociology of tarot are completely irresistible to me as a rare books librarian with a sociology background. So I'm going to try to spare you my enthusiasms for that history and cut to some of the chases here. One of the most popular assertions that is completely false about tarot's history is that it is derived from ancient Egypt. This is a claim that is really easily disproved by material histories. There was paper there. So that really cut it out of possibility to have a paper-based cultural product. More accurate tellings about the origins of tarot locate it more in the Italian Renaissance. And this claim is supported by the evidence in form of surviving 15th century cards, which now reside in special collections, libraries, and museums like these from the Morgan. These decks were not likely used in any divinatory pursuits. They were used mostly to play really popular games that were popular throughout Europe. However, some of the iconography that was present from tarot's origins have ported into our current cards as well. And another kind of important just piece of kind of material history here is that when we assert that tarot was born in Italy, it does tend to obscure some of the non-Western origins of playing cards, which are really important to note. Paper playing cards were produced in China as early as 969 CE. And as recounting of history, the Italian origin story also might help us neglect the consideration of many varied divinatory systems and symbols that come from all over the world and which are manifest in tarot as a contemporary tool. So as you saw, tarot was really lavishly produced and hand-painted in the beginning, and then it was printed, and some of these circulated just as print copies, and some, again, were later lavishly hand-painted over top of the engravings. Tarot as an occult system for predictive purposes was really specifically born of the late 18th century. And as it thrived through Victorian occult circles, it was further imbued with and shaped by Egyptian mania, Kabbalism, and other kinds of cultural or spiritual fascinations with the ancient world that were codified through things like Rosicrucianism or Freemasonry. There is some evidence that there were some engagements with predictive pursuits in these cards, even as early as 1540. But the earliest sort of full body of evidence for tarot being used as a divinatory system doesn't come until 1750, where it's laid out in a manuscript that sort of defines the practices of prediction. So these historical decks are really fascinating and beautiful to behold, but for the purposes of our project, the real turning point historically is the consideration of Pamela Colman Smith. Smith is a queer person of color who moved in theatrical circles of London and was really deeply inspired by Renaissance decks and the Sola-Bosca, which we saw a little bit earlier in particular. And she developed a visual vocabulary for what would be published as the Rider-Waite deck. Her cards, her imagery, and powerful archetypes that she created have since formed the inspirational basis for maybe even thousands of decks. The deck is broadly known and is cataloged as such, however, by the name of Rider-Waite. This reference very obviously, neatly, and injuriously erases Pamela Colman Smith as the artist. And Rider, in fact, who's given the most prominence in this title, was simply the deck's publisher. Waite was Smith's co-creator, really, who wrote the accompanying text and started to provide interpretations and canonical meanings for the cards. So in my practice, I refer to this as the Smith deck, so that's how you'll hear it. But in the broader world, it lives as the Rider deck or the Rider-Waite deck. An argument for collecting contemporary tarot and making the effort to document the many and varied decks that have been produced over the hundreds of years since tarot transcended its simple game structure could be made simply on the grounds of its complete underrepresentation within libraries. For such a prominent text, it is as understudied outside the bounds of a practitioner's landscape as it is undercollected by libraries. The canonical Smith deck, for example, was published in 1910, and it's thought to have sold more than 100 million copies in over 20 countries during the course of its existence. And this easily makes it the most popular tarot deck ever made. Thomas Kuhn transformed the whole discipline of philosophy of science. His 1962 work, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, sold just 1 million copies and was translated into a dozen languages, and it is in almost every academic library as a matter of course. Comparing the Smith decks with books that have sold in more equal numbers, like Alice in Wonderland, or books which have sold even many millions of fewer copies, such as Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets or Catcher of Rye, it's hard to get blip though within library collections. There are only a kind of handful of recordings in WorldCat, and some of those records are even listed in the Union catalog with an apology that says, sorry, no libraries with this specified item were found. So that's some history and context for our collecting work. Many books, articles, library, zines, podcasts, and wide swaths of internet are really filled with tarot history, lore, and how-tos. But what I want to advance here, and the central piece of this project's work, is a claim that tarot is, for all intents and purposes, a modular, purposefully unbound book whose narrative is advanced primarily through images and whose narrative structures are durable, even when they're disrupted from their original ordering, such as in a tarot reading when the cards are randomly pulled from the deck. This definition might seem to be a real librarian's thing. I admit I love to claim that things are books, that anything is a book. It's one of my favorite things to do, but I mean it here like very concretely. I think of the tarot as a book in a technical sense and as a text in a cultural studies sense. Framing it as a book and a text offers us opportunities for understanding and engagement that transcend its uses in a personal practice and offer it as an object for scholarly study and scrutiny. So how does the text work? What we're looking at are pages here of Smith's art. So these are the individual cards laid out next to each other, and we're just looking at the first handful here. These are from a series that we tend to refer to as the Major Arcana. So it begins at 0 with the Fool and takes a journey through all of these archetypes, which represent different elements of our experience through life. So this is the first piece of the Major Arcana. It continues through this series, ending at the World. So we go from the Fool to the World. And then we have the various suits. So in Smith's deck, the suits are represented by swords, and each of there are 4 suits, and each have court cards, the page, the knight, the king, and the queen, as well as numerical cards. And again, these are little vignettes, and they're shaped by different kinds of understandings of what's offered in the pictures. We also have wands as a suit, cups, and pentacles. So each of these cards, that's the structure of the text, but each of the card has its own story and meaning. And this comment might make more sense later if it doesn't now, but I want to note here that there are really different schools of thoughts about how to read a card. There could be really canonical readings that come down, either from Waite or from other tarot practitioners and teachers who have sort of codified a meaning for that card and who can refer to the different symbols and really flesh out a full story that's grounded in those pictures. But one of the things that is important is that you can also have a more intuitive sense of meaning when you approach a card. And our collection particularly illustrates this because the art that we're dealing with and seeing is so varied. Each creator offers us a new way to understand. And so if we just port these canonical meanings over, we're really missing a lot of the point from engaging with the art that is being offered, because the symbology is different, the meaning is different. However, it is instructive and useful to be able to tap back into those canonical meanings and to also the evolving canon. So if I want to look up a card and really go deep into it, I might reach now for Michelle T's Modern Tarot and sort of read what Michelle has to say about a card and understand it that way and engage with the card itself. Okay, so by way of example, right? This is the Magician, and it's the sort of first card after the Fool, which begins us on our journey. And you can see here that, I'm sorry, I'll also pause and say, this is an incredibly visually rich presentation, and I will go through and add metadata to help folks who cannot see as well. I think I don't have the time to explain in detail every card that we'll see, but I will try to add details where it's really significant to understanding throughout. So sorry, I meant to lead with that for anyone who has visual difficulties. All right, so the Magician, right? We see these things: manifestation, creative power, channeled will. And these are concepts that are all linked to some kind of visual element within the card itself. Each card carries its own meaning or meanings as part of a larger narrative. So understanding that larger narrative is significant. To understand the cards when they're all shuffled up and laid out again, we have to kind of know where they came from and what they mean. So the Tower, for example, in the Major Arcana is kind of about our stable foundations cracking, being cast out from comfortable walls that we've been living in. This is a meme that's been going around, I think, because it's so 2020. It's just exactly it. It's like our tarot deck. We opened it up and oops, it's all towers, right? Life might feel that way right now, but a real tarot deck has all of the various experiences. And that's part of the point, is that we get them all in the deck and all get mixed up. So that's when we do the reading. So you could draw a card and simply consider it on its own as a solo card, or you could put them in a reading to be in conversation with one another and begin to build larger narratives and ways of starting to respond to questions or thoughtfulness from a reader. So this is an example of a sort of non-canonical tarot spread. Each of the gray rectangles that we see laid out in this pattern have various narrative frames around them. So when we land a card in the first slot, the card that we read then is not just generic, what does this card mean? We're reading that card in the context of a question about the mysteries of gender, or about our bodies and how to sit in them, or about glamour, how to cultivate it, or euphoria, how to feel it or fuel it. Those are the questions or the frames that a reading might offer. And these can be very, very specific, or they can be very general and open. Part of what we're doing with our collection is expanding the stories that can be deployed within those narrative frameworks of reading. This is a deck I really love because I think the cover of it says it all. Representation matters. And the creators then say, especially with archetypes of magic and power. And so whether or not users are coming to our collection with any kind of framework of a magical practice or consideration in that way, it doesn't matter, because representation and storytelling and the way that we see ourselves in the world is what the tarot can help people do. And so having the diversity of decks and the variety of experiences represented is critical, as they say, with the exclamation point. I also want to point out that this is not a radically new thing. These are cards which really surprised me and delighted me to encounter. They're at the Beinecke Library from a collection. This is known as the Carrie Yale Pack. They are really lavish and beautiful, and they are incredibly unique, which stands out to me as someone who has looked at a lot of these decks, because we almost only ever see a very specifically male presenting body in these early decks. And yet here we've got figures in dresses who are knights and pages. So who knows why, who knows what I can't tell you what the true story is here. There's no narrative that goes along with this sense of discovery. Just that note that even in the 15th century, we have people looking for opportunities to see something that might represent themselves or someone they love or an experience that they wish they could have. All right, so it's back to the collection, really diving in. It's not that tarot decks have never been intentionally collected by libraries or museums before. but they have tended to be collected kind of as those luxury products or rare specimens that I just showed. Sometimes they show up as game objects in circulating libraries, like public libraries. Our collection is really unique as one that has been assembled with scale in mind. We sample pretty broadly from currently commercially available decks on the market with a really specific goal of building this study collection to document the diversity of artistic interpretation. So essentially, we have collected about 500 versions of the same text. Yeah, obviously they're radically different from one another, and we'll explore more of that as we go. I want to talk a little bit here too, because again, if you were in our space and we were sharing this collection with you, I would want to talk about all the labor that goes into creating such a collection. This is not just me functioning as a curator to put it together. A lot of people behind the scenes, from the folks who actually buy the orders, which for this collection, it's no small feat. It's not always as simple as just pressing buttons. It was a really big task that was undertaken. Cataloging the collection with a library, zine librarian code of ethics in mind. Also a huge undertaking, creating metadata, and also physically caring for the collection. So you're seeing here two members of the team, Leticia and Nicole Araya, who are working in our Winch Conservation Lab to build housing for all of the decks that have come in. And the team has a whole presentation that they could offer on all of the innovative products that they have ended up building and being inspired by, engaging with these artistically produced decks, and setting themselves a task of really treating these objects as we would the medieval manuscript that came in our door, applying the same level of care and concern to protecting these cultural materials, which can be really tricky because they come with a lot of unusual things as well. It's not just the decks. And we want to collect a little bit more beyond the deck itself to show what the practices look like. So we might have to account for keeping together crystals with a deck, or jelly beans, which is also an interesting proposition for your conservation team to deal with when you say, oh, we really need to keep these jelly beans in perpetuity. So they were game enough to try and did an encapsulation for these little divinatory jelly beans. We might also collect altar cloths, and we really need all of these things to stay with the deck that they came with, so that users can understand a real range of practice, because the tarot is not just the card. It is in ritual or ceremony as well, and we want to be able to account for that in the course of its study and its future. This is a shot of a very beautifully neat box that assembles all of the tarot decks and their attendant things. So this is what you would get were you to come to our reading room and ask to engage with the collection. All right, so into the collection itself.
Hey, Emily, I have a quick question.
Of course.
From the chat from Naomi. Oh, I'm sorry, from S. Kohler. How do you find the desks, and what is the criteria for selection?
Yeah, so the criteria for selection, the frame that we've offered is artist produced with a priority for indie published, and for decks made by people with diverse backgrounds, and decks that are representing diverse experience. They come from Kickstarter, Indiegogo, Etsy, direct from artists, anywhere they can be found.
That's great. While we're taking questions, Naomi asks, does this collection also include more general oracle decks? Many of these indie decks include new interpretations of court or major arcana cards. Is there a certain level of reinterpretation beyond which it doesn't count as tarot anymore?
That's a great question. Oracle decks are sort of, it's a thing I see them here and I will not look at them. I can't look them in the eye. They're great. There's a lot of interesting stuff happening, but there's so many, and putting a framework around it as a coherent collection wasn't in scope for at least this initial project. The second piece of that question that is important, and which I hope will be clear later in the talk, if someone says it's a tarot deck, and they're trying to be in conversation with that form, we take them at their words. That does not mean that it always works, and I will show you some examples later of decks that really like completely break our understanding of what tarot is or could be.
Wow, that's great. Catherine asks if we are still, or if you are still adding to the collection.
Yes, we are on a hiatus as we are not purchasing physical materials at the library right now, but it is an open collection.
Awesome. All right, well, that's what we have for now, so we'll let you keep going. Everybody feel free to put their questions in the chat and we will interrupt Emilie some more.
Yeah, never fear. All right, so to show you just a little bit, I think this will help make sense pretty immediately of what the interest is. So what you're looking at are rows of different tarot decks and the columns line up. So each column has the same card, which you can see really radically different interpretations of. This is an assemblage of all of the same card from our different texts. This is the strength card, and this assemblage has been organized. This was a very prototypey, experimental sort of beginning for brainstorming about the project and starting to think about what we're going to do with it, what we wanted to see in it. So you can see there are some points of coalescence. The lion, which comes to us, from really early in the tarot traditions, shows up in a lot of these cards, but gets rendered very differently as we go. Then we have a kind of center space for bear representations. We've got a few of those. We have this lovely chihuahua dressed as a lion, lounging on a green pillow. We've got tigers, beetles. We've got strength represented as an act of self-care and care for plants. So lots of different ways at these concepts. Let's do some closer comparisons just to help draw that out. So we're looking on the left at Pamela Colman Smith's original Temperance card, and on the right at Lisa Sterrell's Modern Witch card. They're very, very much in conversation with one another, right? But we have a sort of different feel, obviously a different representation of the figure, and we start to open up then kind of new territory of thinking and of questioning as we're working with these cards. Again, we're in the Magician, who we met earlier, next to the Delta Enduring deck, which takes the Magician not just playing with changing a figure's race or body or something a little bit more concrete. It's opening up a different sort of consideration here. So the Magician now is someone who cooks, who engages with food, who's like working magic with the natural world and feeding people, feeding community, possibly. This is from a deck that I wish I didn't like quite as well as I do, because I find it very difficult to pronounce. It's the Efflorescent Tarot deck. And this is a really interesting deck to me because it was sold with the statement that there's no specific guidebook that goes along with it, and that any Smith-focused or standard tarot guide will apply to it. And I take the artists seriously. They've offered that up, and they say our card means what the card's canonical meaning is. But I look at this card, these are the same card, and I see a really different kind of representation of what the card is offering here. I see a queer desire, I see a luxury in painting and work that somehow feeds a soul, rather than the kind of workmanship that we see in the Smith card.
Emilie.
Yeah.
Is there a listing of what decks you're showing us so that everyone who's looking now will be able to look them up on their own?
Yeah, that'll be part of the metadata that I'll produce and try to describe some of the cards more as well for people who can't see as well or can't see the cards.
Great, excellent, thank you.
So this is an interesting deck. It's produced by a photographer who was working with a Haitian group of artists, and they set out to use local materials and literally recreate the Smith cards in photographs, and the artists put themselves in these various shots. So these are very, very close to the original Smith cards, but obviously render something completely different. Then there are other decks that go really off our rails. So this is a screen printed deck. It is a justice, it corresponds to a justice card, but it represents itself as honesty and has a very different abstract pictorial representation. Here it's in a really beautiful blue. Or we have something like, this is a deck that actually is not in the collection yet officially. We have purchased it, but it is being produced now. It's just been kickstarted. And it is sorry, just went on a periodic table of elements tarot. I couldn't remember the periodic table. So in this case, nitrogen conceptually represents the chariot. Or here you have on the left a picture of Ada Lovelace in the Hexen 2.0 tarot deck. And Ada is serving as the Queen of Cups. Ada, of course, being one of our first computer programmers. And so the idea then of the wealth of knowledge and investment from Cups coming through. Then there are other things where we have stronger revisions. So in the canonical Smith deck, we have a representation of the Hanged Man, which in that rendering is meant to evoke this experience of kind of sitting in discomfort, looking at things from a different perspective. But in the middle card, which is from Courtney Alexander's Dust to Onyx deck, Courtney, in an interview that we did, said very clearly, this is a deck for Black people. And it represents Black people. And to have a hanged man, that evokes lynching, that it doesn't evoke the thing that we were trying to get at conceptually. So Courtney reframes this card as suspension, which is something that also shows up in other decks, including the one on the far left, suspension from a deck called the Sluttist, which is a femme-centered queer pro-sex worker deck. And again, they're tapping into what is the concept here, not just what is the literal mapping.
We have a question from Rick who asks if your collection includes decks from outside English-speaking countries like Europe or Asia.
It does, yes.
Great. Will you be showing some of those as well?
We have, there are some that are mixed in. We can't do a comprehensive view, and I wish also that I had more pictures, but we're going from mostly pictures that were on my phone because we haven't had access to the collection since March. So you will see some. Great. And I can call them out more specifically.
Great. Moya has a few parts to a question, starting with, how can visitors to the library, as you say, read the books of the tarot? Is it interactive? Can you shuffle the cards in the library?
Yes.
Yeah, so that would be once the libraries are open.
Exactly. Right, once the libraries are open. But that is the goal. It is a library, as I said at the beginning, that really invites the hands-on. So we accept a certain, and this is counter to what other libraries' policies might be. So do always take that into consideration when you're in special collections or archives, that their local policies are their local policies, and sometimes they have different philosophies around it and should always be respected. Our philosophy is really that the evidence of use is part of the evidence of the artifact, and I am happy to preserve that. We ask people to act with care because our goal is to have these collections persist as long as they can, but we don't want to preclude use of the elements.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess it kind of, the follow-up has to do with how things might look when we all return to places like the libraries, and if there will be cleanings, or how things can be maybe sanitized while also being preserved.
Yeah.
It may also be a reference to the divination process of cleaning a deck between two people doing a divination. I think it's sort of maybe a combo of both.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about that later. And some of the ideas around like the deck as ceremonial or sacred object too. I'm going to breeze through this piece. These are, I just wanted to show a really like broader swath of variation, but I won't say too much about these because I do want to get us into the digital part as we go. So I'm just going to kind of flip through. I will pause here because this is a really interesting deck, which doesn't just play with changing the archetype of the lovers. One way, it offers 4 variations on the lover's card in one deck, which I think is really fascinating. Okay, so I want to get us into the digital piece of it too, which is the way that we hope to be able to offer up more ability to engage with the collection. Now that you have some sense of it, seeing the cards even in this Zoom format, I hope give you an idea of like how inviting they are to touch. And we certainly do classes, group tours. People love to touch them and work with them. In the Q&A later, I can show you some of what I have at home to give you a better physical sense too. But the question was, how are we going to work with them digitally? We're in the midst of a lot of really great foundational work for the libraries, and we're getting there. But when I proposed the collection building, I wanted something that we could really almost immediately begin experimenting and prototyping with, and thinking about them as a prototype for how we might offer really creative, engaged access to all of our collection materials. So I worked with a former student of mine from Harvard, Nicole Araya, who you saw earlier, and we developed a tarot metadata standard. So the thoughtful establishment of metadata for this collection and setting up our prototype was a really big part of how we were thinking about going forward. And of course, this is like divination work on our own part because we had no idea how people might want to engage the collection. But we determined that having those foundational structures in place would allow them to build anything that they might dream up on top of the structure. And this approach is really logically consistent with our library's general API first strategy. So we made sense of the structures that I showed you earlier, the structure of the deck, and we rendered them navigable as coherent objects, as well as queryable across the corpus. So we wanted to be able to link back card to card to card, no matter where we were in the digital space. So you can see here the beginning of our tarot metadata. And this is kind of the sense of what it looks like, right? We've got unique IDs, and then we're saying this is its position, and here are how they are linked. So the fools are all linked together. There are, of course, in our collection, many cases where the arcana don't clearly map to conventional suits, or in which they are really different, perhaps, but still do map. So this again is the Delta Enduring deck, and they use moths as a suit here. I think probably I won't go too far into this, but we can maybe jump into questions later. I just want to make sure we can get through to the end so you can see a little bit more. So the Delta Enduring deck, my point there is really that it's meaningfully connected to the kind of concepts of the suits. Others just get really playful. So we have Polaroids representing swords, or wands representing cassettes. There's no real reason, it's just fun. Or it might be an aesthetic choice, where here we get knives, which represent swords. It's a very close swap, but there's something that is aesthetically opened up by the change. Sometimes decks also add completely additional bonus cards, or as we were talking about earlier, like really mix us up. We have no idea how to map anything. So for example, in this deck, We've got numbers, and it's called a tarot, and it could map to other things that we have in the collection, but we have no idea what to do with it. So we accounted for that in the metadata as well. Things like the happy squirrel or the cat that is both alive and dead. This is our little prototype. It is very early and very experimental, but loading the digital images in and applying the metadata schema, we have a site that we can begin to do some things with. One of which is very obviously just explore the features of and the opportunities of a digital environment to look at detail on a card in ways that are difficult in person. The other is to collocate or explore across the whole corpus. What are the colors? What are the visual vocabularies that are used? And also to start to map out lines of influence. We're also running 5 different out-of-the-box AI services across the corpus. And what it does is produce descriptive and interpretive tags, which are a variety of levels of useful, right? So one of the things it's actually quite useful for is exploring bias in AIs. So for example, here we get some cards that are all rendered or tagged as sexy. These are also tagged as sexy. So the AI just has its own little imagination, which is kind of interesting to trace. Then we get some deeper levels of problem, perhaps, where we get tags of protection, and you see, these guns and more militaristic sorts of representations. Also, we get one of the things that the AI loves to do is tag anything in a hat as a gentleman, no matter what the figure is actually representing. I wanted to do a little bit of exploration of what the tags offer us that is useful. So looking at these 2 cards, we've got on the left Smith's card with 3 swords through a heart, and then on the right, this is from Moon Power Tarot, 3 swords through a figure who's hanging kind of in space and appears to be bleeding. So the 3 of Hearts is about heartbreak. Grief, rejection, separation. That's what the artist says of this unique card too. And we could just take it at its word and say, okay, we can apply the canonical understanding of Smith and Waite to this card too, and we're just fine. But we do get more detail if we really start to take the art seriously. We get a bunch of different tags. So we have a tag of injury and pain. So we get into the description, but we have blood and weapons. We have pain, which is an interpretation of the image that is actually grounded in physical features. It pulls out this concept of the heart on the sleeve, which is not actually even on this person's sleeve, it's on the dress, but there are all these little broken hearts on the garment, and it calls up again that sense of vulnerability. We get a tag like open to attack. You see that in the way that the body is bent back. We also get this concept of suspension or being suspended. And the interpretive move that we can make there with just that word, just that observation that's offered up kind of, again, at scale by AI, is a sense of how does it link to other kinds of art and representations of questions around suspension and how we choose to sit in pain or rest in pain and how we might choose to get out of it. Okay, I'm going to do a quick speed through some fun projects that are coming out of this work as well. So we've been imagining creating space to like enter into these cards and treat them really as artworks. So this is a little bit of a prototype where the cards are all rendered almost as though they're museum items on a wall, and you can start to navigate them and pull up metadata. The transparent tarot deck we have has served as a sort of inspiration for how we might take elements from different cards that we digitize and layer them on or change them up by changing out backgrounds. This is another student project that wonders how we could use the tarot database to sort of look for the lines of inspiration from other pieces of artwork, build our own decks out of the corpus. Of course, you can really pick a theme and then start to pull your own deck together, created out of hundreds of different decks. Element extraction, where we're really, again, kind of focusing in on some of what the AI that we're playing with does very well, which is recognize symbols or objects. The Fool Builder, which is another piece that they sort of dreamed up as part of a student project. And then we have a kind of local source of inspiration too. So Jennifer, do you want to talk about this piece? I won't step on your effort.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks for including us in the talk. It was such a privilege for the conservation team to get to work on the housing of all of these decks, not least of all because they are 500 artist books and we are all trained as bookbinders. And so it was really exciting, not just getting to see the imagery, but getting to kind of compare what we do to some of the images that we see. So just in the ways that representation matters, kind of on a human level, on a work level, it can be really illuminating too, to think about what is a sword? What do we value? And so much of what we think of when it comes to book arts is also rooted in a really medieval appearing tradition. And so I think a lot of that led to brainstorming our own deck that is going to be rooted in conservation and in the book arts. So this is an example of some of what has been inspiring us in terms of a deck that we would like to create, and we'll be working with various conservators and book artists, and a call to artists will be forthcoming so that we can create a deck at MIT that kind of represents a current view of book arts and printing, and kind of incorporates some of what I think hasn't changed, and some of what has changed in the symbols that we would actually use.
Thanks, Jen. And the conservation team is issuing a call for anyone who wants to participate and make cards as part of the deck too, so you can join in that way. And I'll just end by saying too, that we just recently did a conservation focused talk on this collection, and an artist in our collection joined us for that talk. And one of the things that she said, which I think was really moving for all of us, was that she felt the level of care and detail and thoughtfulness that was brought to these decks, and having them as part of a library collection where they really could live in perpetuity was kind of the most sacred thing she could think of, and context for her deck. So we were really pleased to hear that, and are excited to work more with content creators. So I'll stop there, and we have a few moments for questions.
Great.
For more questions.
Thank you, Emily. This was such a great talk and presentation. Pixie Rose says, I've noticed a few indie tarot artists begin to reorganize the major arcana. Even the Fool is sometimes 22 instead of 0. Have you encountered that, and how do you think that would affect your metadata? Or does that fall under the unique category?
No, it's true. And we do have some decks that do that. And in those cases, our metadata schema is flexible enough to allow us to associate it. Because we're sort of saying the bias of our metadata is that it's always going to hook back into a canonical structure, just so that we can help people understand what the cards are trying to do. So you'd see a 0 Fool and you'd see a 22 Fool or something, and you'd be able to sort of understand that something was different, but there was also an effort at connecting the concepts.
Great. Naomi says, sometimes these projects on crowdfunding sites either don't make their goal or the project falls through at a later stage. Do you try to reach out to artists to get sample or one-off versions of the deck for the collection? Yeah,
that's a great idea. It's something that we have sort of noted as a collection development possibility, is to build more of the kind of artist's archive component of this collection, which has not happened yet, but I guess I should have given some timing around this. It's all pretty new, so we've gotten pretty far in the course of the year, but that's a next step.
Great. So again, if anyone wants to add in some last questions for Emilie before we hop off, we'll give it another minute or two. But Emilie, thank you so much for this beautiful presentation of these really incredible tarot cards.
Thanks everyone for joining.
Yeah. Any last questions?
Emilie, I want to thank you as well on behalf of my TAC. It was a spectacular, amazing talk today, and we were really treated to something really special. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And we have recorded this program. We'll end the recording right now, and then it will be on YouTube. We'll send an email out to all the participants to let you know that you can view the presentation there. All right, and thanks everyone for coming.